Curt Hennig was the archetype of polished in the ring. Every dropkick snapped, every perfect plex landed with textbook precision. Yet behind the scenes, his cut-to-the-chase personality left no room for pretense. He respected hard work, technical skill, and he loathed anything less. Over a 20-plus year career spanning AWA, WWF, WCW, and TNA, Hennig amassed 5 genuine backstage grudges. Shoot heat that went beyond the usual locker room ribbing. Each sprang from clashes of style, safety, or sheer ego. In this video, we'll chronicle Hennig's real-life feuds. Lex Luger was a physical specimen. Broad shoulders, chiseled jaw, hair that looked like it had been fed protein shakes. But to Curt Hennig, Luger was like a walking billboard for everything wrong with late 80s wrestling. Muscles over mat skills, ego over etiquette, and promos delivered with the emotional range of a car park bollard. The friction between Hennig and Luger wasn't a televised feud. It was a shoot hatred that simmered for years across both from the WCW and the WWF locker rooms. Hennig, a second-generation technician who, if he wanted, could sell a sneeze, reportedly couldn't stand Luger's stiff, awkward style. And in return, Luger allegedly saw Hennig as an old-school guy who didn't appreciate the new, jacked-up, promo-heavy era. In multiple shoot interviews, peers like Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, and Bret Hart hinted at the cold relationship between the two. Hennig thought Luger lacked psychology and fundamentals. And Luger? Well, he likely didn't appreciate Hennig mocking his in-ring selling by flopping like a fish on dry land after a Luger clothesline. Even their interactions during matches were reportedly laced with professional contempt. In WCW, they shared the ring during NWO angles, but watch closely. Hennig takes liberties, chops a little harder, holds a suplex a little longer, sends a clear message. You may be the total package, but I'm the total professional. Hennig once ribbed Luger by hiding his tanning oil, which, to be fair, is like stealing a fish's water. Luger spent an entire afternoon redder than Vader's singlet. No apology was given. That was Curt's style. Make your point, make it funny, and move on. So no, this wasn't a case of polite difference in philosophy. Curt thought Lex didn't belong in the same ring as him, and you can almost hear Curt muttering, "Perfect doesn't sell for plastic." If ever there was a wrestler that looked like he walked out of an Abercrombie store but talked like he lived in a tanning bed, it was Buff Bagwell. While his name promised muscular charisma, Curt Hennig saw nothing but inflated ego and empty talent. Their tension wasn't subtle. It was the kind of backstage frostiness that made even Scott Steiner look like a calming influence. Hennig reportedly loathed Bagwell's self-importance, often joking that Buff spent more time polishing his hat than perfecting his headlocks. Hennig called him all look, no hook, a dig at Buff's lack of in-ring psychology and inability to carry a match unless he was being carried by someone else. The two shared locker rooms in WCW during the tail end of the Monday Night Wars, and while Bagwell was flexing his way to mid-card stardom, Hennig was quietly making it known that he wouldn't be caught dead putting over a guy who wrestled like he was practicing in a mirror. During one tag match, Hennig allegedly stiffed Buff so hard with a chop that Bagwell forgot what city he was in. The next night, Buff tried returning the favor, only for Hennig to laugh it off, no sell it, and promptly returned fire with a suplex that could have cracked Bagwell's ego. According to insiders like Raven and Conan, Hennig saw Bagwell as a product of style over substance booking. WCW gave Buff a spotlight because of his look, not because of his work. And that, to Hennig, a man who took pride in elevating others through wrestling craft, was borderline offensive. Let's not forget Hennig's famous backstage rib, switching out Bagwell's mirror spray for furniture polish. Bagwell's mirror was fogged for weeks, which is tragic when your entire character revolves around admiring yourself. Buff wasn't the only WCW ego Hennig disliked, but he was one of the few who truly got under his skin. Hennig would later call him a glorified cheerleader in boots. If wrestling Stephen Hawking went haywire, it might resemble a Scott Steiner promo. Curt hated how Scott's ferocity in the ring often became genuine risk to opponents. Multiple shoot interviews, Kevin Nash, road agents, describe Steiner's infamous potatoing habit, hitting just like a bag of cement. Hennig, ever the protector of his peers, drew the line at unnecessary punishment. After Steiner botched a suplex that dropped an opponent awkwardly, Hennig confronted him. "You're auditioning for demolition," Curt barked. One night in '98, Steiner threw Hennig's gear bag against a wall, allegedly to prove strength. Hennig retorted by shoving Steiner into a row of lockers. No bones broken, but egos were. Nash said Hennig hated working with Steiner because you never knew if you'd walk away with a concussion or a paycheck. If wrestling beefs were steak cuts, then Curt Hennig and Scott Steiner's was a raw, bleeding slab of top-shelf animosity, seasoned with steroids, ego, and more yelling than a New York divorce court. On paper, you'd think Mr. Perfect and Big Papa Pump might have gotten along. Both were powerhouses, both could work snug, and both had reputations as locker room leaders, albeit on wildly different ends of the sanity spectrum. But in reality, Curt thought Scott was a loud, chemically boosted embarrassment, and Scott thought everyone was an embarrassment who wasn't named Steiner. In the end, it wasn't just personality clash. It was a battle of two worlds colliding, one of perfect timing, ring psychology, and professionalism, versus one of raw aggression, gym-obsessed rage, and vocabulary crimes against humanity. If wrestling were judged by haircuts and nepotism, Brutus Beefcake would be champion of the universe. Unfortunately for him, Curt Hennig valued in-ring talent and originality. Two things Brutus misplaced somewhere in the 1980s. Beefcake and Hennig never had a knockdown backstage fight, but the distaste was mutual and palpable. According to interviews with Bret Hart and Brian Knobbs, Hennig considered Beefcake Hogan's luggage, only carried around because Hulk insisted. Their tension bubbled behind the curtain. Hennig was vocal about Brutus coasting on friendships rather than skill. He allegedly referred to Beefcake's finisher, the sleeper hold, as the Ambien of wrestling moves. And don't even get him started on the giant shears. Once during a WrestleMania after-party, Hennig supposedly told a fan, "If you're watching Brutus wrestle, you might as well watch a lawn chair wrestle itself." To Curt, Beefcake was the personification of wasted TV time, a gimmick in search of a skill set. If there was one man in WCW who had the ability to both baffle and infuriate Curt Hennig, it was Kevin Sullivan. The backstage booker, taskmaster gimmick runner, and king of weird storylines may have been a political survivor, but Curt Hennig reportedly saw him as a chaotic meddler with a pencil and a grudge. Their beef wasn't based on one moment. It was a slow burn that simmered behind the scenes. Hennig was a sharp-witted technician who believed wrestling should be crisp, athletic, and logical. Sullivan, on the other hand, looked like he was operating out of Aleister Crowley's diary with a side of Florida swampland lunacy. According to Eric Bischoff on 83 Weeks, Hennig was frequently frustrated that Sullivan's booking often favored friends, cliques, and cartoon nonsense over work rate and realism. Curt didn't have patience for voodoo angles or Dungeon of Doom stuff. He thought it made the whole locker room look like idiots, Bischoff said. The breaking point may have been during Hennig's late 90s WCW run, when he was saddled with mid-card feuds and flaky storylines, while greener wrestlers and Sullivan favorites leapfrogged him on the card. One WCW agent recalled Hennig openly mocking Sullivan backstage, doing an impression of him mumbling creative instructions no one understood, ending with, "Just go out there and talk about the moon and make it spooky." Even worse, Curt allegedly believed Sullivan didn't respect his status as a second-generation veteran. When Curt lobbied for a push-post NWO, Sullivan reportedly brushed it off. Hennig later told Mike Graham, "If I'd known all I had to do to get on TV was put on black face paint and scream about Hulkamania, I would have done that instead of learning to wrestle." There was also heat over backstage hierarchy. Hennig, a natural locker room leader, didn't appreciate how Sullivan's booking would favor chaos over consistency. Curt was old school. "You showed up, you worked, and you earned your spot," said Shane Douglas. Sullivan came from that old Florida mindset, but he played favorites like it was high school. Curt hated that. Despite working together in the late 80s, NWA, and again in WCW, their personalities never meshed. Curt liked ribbing, but not when it came from someone in power playing games with his career. He didn't trust Kevin, Bischoff added. He thought Sullivan was always 3 steps ahead, but never in the right direction. So there you have it. The 5 unfortunate souls who earned the rare distinction of being on Curt Hennig's permanent "You Suck" list. But don't think for one second that these were the only names that grated on the nerves of Mr. Perfect. Oh no. If we had the time and the budget for legal protection, we could have easily tripled this list. To all the wannabe wrestlers who fumbled a suplex, missed a cue, or thought charisma was just flexing in the mirror, congratulations. You were hated by Curt Hennig, but not enough to get top billing. That includes the lumbering muscleheads who needed GPS to find a wrist lock, the backstage suck-ups who got pushed harder than a midwife on overtime, and the gimmick wrestlers whose only talent was owning a Halloween costume. Curt saw you. He judged you. And in many cases, he probably whispered something under his breath as you botched a sunset flip for the 3rd time in a row. You didn't make the list. Not because you weren't awful, but because you weren't memorable enough in your awfulness. And that, in Mr. Perfect's book, was the greatest insult of all. So, next time you're sitting in a convention hall charging $20 for a blurry 8x10 and wondering why nobody respects your work rate, just remember, Curt Hennig might not have hated you most, but he absolutely hated you a little. And honestly, in this business, that still counts as relevance. Thanks for watching.